Hello and welcome everybody to the GMG Indie Hour. It is May 2025 and we are in episode 21 indie games. Well, actually more than that, close to 40 now because the first 15 episodes, I'm pretty sure we were doing two at a time. And then some of the games we picked were of such scale and scope that they weren't necessarily the indie, like the zine-sized indie games, and we pulled it back to doing one per episode. And it was a good thing, too, because today we are covering The Woods, second edition. And this is from Oakbound Studios. It was this is the second edition of this. Was originally published, I think, 5 or 10 years ago, and has been sort of like zhuzhed up with some beautiful art, some beautiful interior photography, and in full color. And it's available on Drive-Thru RPG. Now, this was the patron pick for this week, and boy, howdy, this is a big one. This game is very ambitious, and if I was to give like a pop culture analog to kind of what it's trying to accomplish, it's almost if you're looking at a Games Workshop product, it's almost Inquisitor. It's meant to be played a bunch of different ways, from solo RPGs to dungeon crawls to skirmish level games, all the way up to mass battle games. And the single rulebook gives you all those experiences in once. It's also really unique in that it doesn't use dice. It uses almost like a bid system where you pick stats to compare against difficulty ratings for the things you're trying to do. And if it adds up to equal or better, then you accomplish it. If you don't, then it doesn't. And it requires a little bit of agreement between the two players as to how hard or how easy something is to do at a given moment. So let's check out the Indie Hour. Now, if you haven't been to one of these before, these games are all picked by my patrons, the GMG patrons. And what we typically do is every week when you're watching one of these live on YouTube, like sort of the public YouTube feed, there will be a recording happening that same day at some point for the next episode. And that gets picked through a poll on Patreon where you can submit your own suggestions. And we're trying to like group source getting more indie games in front of a variety of audiences. So while I am but one humble man and my brain contains many indie games, I can't surf every corner of the internet. My kids need me to cook and clean for them, and therefore there is a limited amount of time for which I can source the infinite seas of the internet. So us sort of like collecting together en masse as the GMG community and pulling this stuff together as a group has been really great. And you can see over here in the chat some of my patrons hanging out with me today, talking about what we've picked and what's going on. And we do a sort of like a private interactive before and after the show where we talk about things, catch up on the week. So for instance, the patrons just got to see what I've been doing in the background here in the studio, and what has been filmed so far this week and talk about what's coming up. And then we do a little after show too, where we sort of break down what we just saw. So yeah, let's dive in and check out The Woods. This is available on Drive-Thru RPG. And if you ever want to check out a game on the Indie Hour, you can go to the links in the video description and you usually find a link to what we're playing with. Also, the poll itself is going to have all of the things that are celestial. They'll be linked where you can grab them too in advance if you want to read ahead. And it's available for $2 as a watermark PDF. It's currently on sale for $1.50. But you can also get a softcover color book for $25. This is all Canadian prices, by the way. It's probably $20 US, $25 for a hardcover, and then you can get a combined, I think it's just a couple bucks more to get it with PDFs as well. And it's got an Electrum bestseller rating, which is great. It's been played for quite a while, and there are quite a few reviews and ratings on here as well. So not reviews, ratings on here as well, because this is a fairly august publication and is in its second edition. Like I said, lovely full color artwork for the introductory, and we have I think it's almost 200 pages. I think it was 194 pages overall in this rulebook. And boy, howdy, is it dense. And as I said before, like there's a reason for that, and that is that this game is trying to accomplish quite a bit. Introduction: The Woods originated as a world and miniatures range inspired by the creatures of British and European folklore, which sometimes gets co-opted into high fantasy but rarely enjoy their own unique setting. The rules were borrowed from a post-apocalyptic game we had been writing, reworked with the help of some Dark Age reenactors and folklorists, into what has become the first edition in 2016. That's what I thought about 10 years ago. Since then, many new ideas have been explored, fresh eyes cast over the core system, and many, many games have been played. The results is in this book and will be expanded and refined and into a much more concise and comprehensive volume over time. The structure of the book echoes the creation of the game. You'll be introduced to the world and its inhabitants before you encounter any rules. Then, after you've been through the small section which contains the central principles and action tables which make up the game, there's a host of ideas for what you might use to use them for. And that is sort of, and this is from 2019, so about 5 years ago is when this second edition came out, from Jeff. And there are lots of expansions and other things done by Oakbound Studios. For instance, there's like Under a Mountain kind of dungeon crawler expansion and stuff too. And you can see here, yeah, it's 190 pages overall into the reference section. So like we said, it's a post-apocalyptic mortal realm. The Fae have basically created the Tuatha, who are, mankind-ish, the folk, the people, and eventually realized that the Tuatha's superpower is violence. As people are tend to do, they solve their problems through power, and there's a huge sort of rift between the two like peoples over time, which causes the Fae to fade into the background. The massive civilization that they created to sort of fall into ruin, and the magical creatures and things as they walked between worlds that they collected that are in the outlands around their civilization to go wild. And this is sort of the land of Talamar, where there's no kings, queens, or countries amongst the people. Then it kind of like goes totally wild. And you can see here it's a circular sort of like peninsula with the various different biomes that they're living in. And it's really well thought, like laid out. You can tell there's like a Tolkien-esque sort of like world crafting that they wanted to do to, like create all the different places you could possibly play or set these things. And also to have a reason why all the different inhabitants are going to be here. So once you've heard about that, we're going to jump into what the profiles are. And there's sort of, in this game, there's two sets of profiles. There's stats and then there's substats. The core stats of the game are going to be wisdom, perception, courage, agility, strength, and endurance. That's how much damage you can take. Strength, how strong you are, obviously. Agility, how like athletic you are. Your courage, how you perform under pressure. And your perception is how observant you are. And finally, your wisdom is your intellect and knowledge. Your alignment is either Seelie or unseelie. And that has nothing to do with if you're good or evil. It's just how do you see the Fae? Right? How do you, like the creators of this world that are kind of almost like the walking gods, what is your relationship to them? If you're Seelie, then you're kind of indifferent, at least if not like friendly to the Fae. Unseelie creatures hate the Fae, usually because they've been dragged there from across worlds against their will and dumped in this like weird sort of like borderland in between everything. And then on top of that, you're going to have an inherent weakness potentially. So like, for goblins, like a cold iron for certain Fae creatures is a weakness to, they'll be damaged, fire, salt, stuff like that. And then skills, traits, and equipments are all the things you have, things you can do, or things that are inherent to you. And the following sections are all just the stats for everything that you can do, so everything you can take in a game. And then also the warband template and the battle template, depending upon how big you want to make your game. So there's sort of three sets of stats presented across the next sort of like almost like bestiary section that describes not only the rest of the world and the creatures inside of it, but also how they relate to the level of game you want to play with this rule set. And you don't get a ton of advance warning on that. So without the context, you almost want to, like when I first read this rule book, I almost would have been better off if I'd skipped to the core principles in the action table and then skipped back up to the top and then read through what this stuff was, because it would make more sense. So when we start with the Tuatha and who they are, you're going to know a little bit more about it. So you do get some diagram stuff like what base size your miniature should be on, because the whole intent is that everything's played with miniatures too. This is a tabletop game. The RPG side of it is still, like going to be done theater of the mind, like walking around and traveling and all this sort of like problem solving stuff. But as soon as you get into combat, they'll have you put miniatures down. And you can create characters, you can play as warbands, or you can have armies. And so all three of these boxes basically will call it what those things are going to be. So the Tuatha, the people, these are your humans, living in this realm. Like I said, they've basically been abandoned by their gods, the Fae, who helped create them and lived with them, because the Fae became sort of jealous and also, fearful of the power of their creations, because the Fae themselves wouldn't go to war and do violence, but the Tuatha would. And now we got our standard profiles. And like I said, usually when you're looking at a miniature game, you're like, where are the dice? So first spoiler alert about this game, you don't do any dice rolling. It's no RNG. It's just stat picking against difficulty numbers. And if you hit the difficulty number, you succeed. Your level of success and failure can be based as well upon how bad or how far away from success you were. So willpower 2, perception 2, courage 2, agility 2, strength 2, endurance 6. You take 6 damage. Their alignment is Seelie, so they're generally at least indifferent to the Fae because they used to live with them, not necessarily hostile. And they're going to have a scrammus axe and a belt as their basic equipment. Everybody's going to have one of those things. This is for creating a character. So then you get your key characteristics like the traditionalist, territorial, stalwart, defensive, proud, prone to aggression, and protective. Motivations, this is your role-playing stats. And then you can pick any one skill from melee-craft, artisan, wilder lore, axecraft, weaver, leatherworker, or smith. And any other one trait like anxiety, arrogance, awkward, clumsy, high strung, ill-fated, independent, uncertain. And equipment, you can buy 25 rings worth of equipment. Rings is the common currency of this game. So the only reason I go through the RPG section, because we're talking about tabletop wargames today, is you're allowed to make an RPG character if you want, or if you have one made already, and have them be your warband leader. If you're just going to play the game as the skirmish game, some of your stats are going to be irrelevant in the skirmish game, but it can be fun to make your own character if you want, and then go buy them equipment. The other option is just do the warband section, which is this next call-out box, and you can see here a Tuatha Boar Sounder is going to be the leader. The Boar Sounder is the sort of like the chieftain of these tribes of exiles that live outside the realm of the Fae, because they've basically been pushed to the outskirts. Their equipment's going to be a sling. They start off with for free. Their skill is that they're leader, and then you get 10 points of upgrades that you can use to stack different abilities. So you get the core character stat line, and that's why using this in warbands is probably going to be better. They're going to be a little bit more powerful than the Tuatha that you start off with when you make a character. The idea between those two things being compatible is just, if you want to use your cool character you've been playing an RPG with for a while, then you're allowed to go off and make your own. But yeah, you can buy common items, weapon items. You can have a padded jerkin, leather jacket, scale mail, ring mail, and then 20 additional points of troops if you want as well. And when you're building a warband, you also have access to your troops. So you can have 100 points worth of troops if you want to be in your army, or your warband rather, when you're playing the skirmish mode. And those are the Fedrinks, the Kaimpas, Hirmans, and Silks. And they all have their own stat lines too, but you don't really customize them as much. You can customize them a little bit by making them, like slightly different arms. So like the Kaimpa can have a wood shield and strap or a leather jacket. The Fed can have a leather jacket or scale mail. The Hirman are outlaws. They can have no actual additional stuff, but the Silks can have a flint axe or a short bow. And this is the idea behind these warbands. Now, even within these factions like the Tuatha, there can be other warbands. Like, for instance, a Wolver cult. These are your were people. So they can have, not even were people. They're more like barbarians, berserkers. Like, they have, like, the spirit of animals inside them. So the Wolver cult starts the same core stat line. You can upgrade your leader the same. But they sum with the lone wolf trait, the skill woodman, and then they get wolf claws and wolf skins. And their warband troops are silver skins, deerhounds, gray skins, and fangs. And you can see that that's going to give you a slightly different sort of feeling. And the Wolver cult warbands, cults grow up amongst the Tuatha who've had contact with particularly influential or terrifying folk. The impact of the experience outlives memory of that creature or identity, and this is sort of like where it comes from. The idea being that like some kind of generational terror has created this tribe's, affinity to wolves. And then we get armies. This is the army stuff. How do you take units and, how do you disperse them across the battlefield? The army style game, it's pretty much just, rules for doing group actions. And they give you this as opposed to the warband entries for kind of giving you a little bit of, larger, larger units that are all equipped the same, that are all going to act the same. They homogenize the characters, and that way your units aren't all individuals, they're all characters in the battlefield. You can have multiple of the same guy easier by doing their recruitment this way. So that's the Tuatha. We get into the different variations here, so you can see what other types of warbands you can make. The Woodfolk, you can play as pixies, which is very funny. Imagine a pixie warband. And you can see the pixies here are obviously far less durable as the humans. They're Seelie. They have 2 across the board, but their courage is a little bit higher. The War Clans, for instance, they have a 4 courage laird, their leader. And then you have Mackers, Gillies, Clanshogs, and Badgers as your upgrades. Badgers are actual literal badgers. Badgers who the pixies live with are as much a part of the clan as the folks themselves. Your warband kind of have more badgers than pixies, but they're literal badgers. Like they're actual badgers that these pixies live with. I think is really funny. You can see some pictures of other pixie folk. Bogarts. You can have Boogles. You can have weird little creatures. these like dryady creatures. What are they called? Denadru on larger bases, 50 mil bases. Fodden, the wildmen, they sort of like trolls. Gillydoos, the green man. Wolvers, so this is the Wolver cult, right? That the Wolver cult have had like contact with. Weird shapeshifters. The Yaltog, like this is where we're like getting into the really esoteric Fae stuff. So you can see they've really done their research here. The Fenfolk who live in the bogs, the Maiari, who are the Fimir in Warhammer terms, right? The one-eyed sort of like lizard people with the club tails. Kelpies, the weird horses that live in the water. And you can take whole warbands of them. And there are some cool female miniatures out there. Coral Knights. And like I said, so we're like well into the book now. Most of the book is going to be these unit entries at the beginning. Leprechauns, because of course leprechauns, why not? And look at these wonderful illustrations. I gotta say the art in this book is from a variety of different artists, and it's great. Has a real like Brian Froud feeling to it. Yeah, why not? Let's have a leprechaun unit. Spriggans. Yeah, the weird wood folk. And Spriggans are kind of like what you'd imagine the Warhammer Age of Sigmar Dryads to be. Right, and you can have warbands, characters can be Spriggans. Into Pecs. What are these called? Rog Spirit Hosts. The like they're, if you've ever played Zelda Breath of the Wild, they're the Koroks. They're basically Koroks. These little mask wearing spirit hosts. Bargists. Bakans. Oh my god, so many things. The Fuka, which is the weird like goat head man. Trows. And I think the hill folk are next, or the mine folk are next, which is our gnomes and dwarves. Yeah. Gnomes and dwarves who live under Mount Silence. The expansion actually is the King Under Mount Silence, so that's the dungeon crawl expansion. Yeah. Starting profiles for gnomes, right, where their wisdom is higher, but their agility is lower than the average human. Goblins, because you gotta have goblins, and they're considered mine folk. Now that goblin drawing, these are goblins, man. Look at these weirdy Brian Froudy style Gary Chalk goblins. They're fantastic. Goblins have a wisdom of 1 and a perception of 1, but a courage of 3, an agility of 2, a strength of 1, but they're 8 endurance. It's hard to kill a goblin. They're like cockroaches. That makes me so happy. I love it. They're brave but stupid. And then the Kobold Revolution and the Gnaw-folk, the rats. The kobolds are kept under the heel of the goblins and only allowed outrider. And then the Nalocks are the rat men, basically. Which I don't know if that's a real folklore thing, or they just included these because it's fun to have Skaven. But obviously the old Skaven miniatures being used in the profile here. But they're included in this universe. I think that's great. And then the Fae themselves. So having these weird Fae. Yeah. It's the illustrations of the Fae in this, how would I describe them? They're very Bioshock. They're very the people of Rapture. They look like splicers from Rapture, which just means degenerate elves, because why not? With their habayas, carrying them on little panaks around the city. And so you can have Fae warbands. And they're all tyrants. They're all terrible. With their servants of brownies. Whenever I think of brownies, I think of the brownie played by Kevin Pollak in Willow, which makes me so happy that at some point Kevin Pollak, sarcastic comedian Kevin Pollak, played a 6-inch tall brownie with Val Kilmer. Makes me so happy every time I think of that movie. And yeah, the variety of Fae basically who are, they're your elves. They're your weird, haughty, arrogant elves. And then we get into merfolk, animals, other things that might show up. And after that, we get the game rules. All right. So first things first, core principle of this game is what you can see, and that's perception. It's super important to all actions because you can only really do actions against something you can perceive. And there's 2 elements that sort of tell you what your perception range is. The first is the distance from your base. equal to your perception stat. So if we go back to that Tuatha in the beginning, who was like 3 across the board, they can perceive something 3 inches away from them. It seems very short, but there's lots of different variations. That's like your active perception is 3 inches away. You can still see things further away, but acting against something, it's, if you think about 3 inches as being about 3 yards away, like I'm in this room, I can kind of act immediately to something inside this room. Anything in a room further away, I have to kind of move out to detect to be able to act. It's sort of, that's what your active like engagement range is. And then you got your template, your field of vision, which is 90 degrees, right? So you have this little model-based template for what you can see and what is inside your peripheral vision. Inside the very front, 60 degrees, and then the additional ones to the side are going to be your peripheral. So line of template, so the center line of your front of your base lines up with your vision. Anything within this arc can be perceived by the model as long as it's from model's eye view. Model's bases don't count for this purpose. The model itself must be visible. There's no maximum range of vision. The model can see right to the way of the board if there's no obstacles in the way. The field of vision has 2 sections marked peripheral. Ignore these until you find a scale which enables you to use them. So the peripheral section allows you to widen your field of vision, basically. And there's skills like awareness style skills that allow you to use that side of the template. So in the beginning, it's the inside of the template. Afterwards, it'll widen it out to being significantly wider. So whether or not a model can perceive what's going on around in the board is crucial. So it's very important to watch the direction your models are facing. And that's where we come into like why this game doesn't have dice. Positioning super important. There's also no pre-measuring whatsoever. And that's going to become really important in ranged combat later on. Models are typically mounted on penny-sized bases. They could be other sizes as well and different hexagons, but basically what you want to always have is the front facing of your model's base so that you can align it to the template so you know where it's going to go. And then game structure. Okay, so when I start talking about sub-stats, this is what we begin to get into, is when you pick stats and put them together to give your bonuses. So a game turn of the woods is made up of game turns and activations. There's typically in a warband skirmish game, which is what we're going to kind of focus on here, there's 12 turns in a game where you're trying to do your objective. Everybody in the game is going to have a different objective potentially, and you're all trying to achieve them against each other while stopping other people from doing it. When you activate a model, it's going to be able to take up to its stamina in activations, and they activate in order based on their decisiveness. So stamina we'll talk about in a minute, but decisiveness is basically how it's your initiative, if you want to use other game terms, and it's your wisdom plus your perception plus your courage. So if that Tuatha is what we're going to be talking about now, that would be 9, right? Wisdom 3 plus perception 3 plus courage 3, or sorry, 6. It would be perception 2, wisdom 2, courage 2. If I was two's across the board for that one. So an overall 6 for decisiveness. The leader type might have a higher courage, for instance. That might put you at 7. And you're going to go in descending order of decisiveness, starting at 9. And then you spend all of your stamina for activation points. And then you move down to 8, 7, 6, 5. If you have multiple models with the same decisiveness, you get to choose what order they activate in. And if two different players, if they're owned by the different players, the players take turns to activate one model, beginning with the player with the turn counter. And the turn counter goes to different people because you can play with multiple people in this mission. And I actually really like the decisiveness and stamina budgets in this game. They're doing a lot with the core stats because there's no dice involved. So you're like increasing your core stats as far as like experience building and stuff like that in the game is really important. And knowing when your guys are going to activate is really key to like your positioning and how you do things. So having that turn marker hand around to be basically the tie break on decisiveness is a powerful ability, but it doesn't require any randomness. And there's no like, you just have it go around. Everybody gets a turn doing it. Then we have refreshing. That's when you get all your stamina back. I zipped out there for a second. A model usually refreshes when it activates its activation point. When a model refreshes, its stamina is restored to its maximum level and it can undertake new actions. A model can also refresh it, receives an order, or it's on alert and perceives a change. That can be done midway through games by certain actions that happen. So now you have your stamina, and this is your budget for doing actions during the turn. I'm going to flip back to the end to give you some context here because the description of what stamina is and how it works makes more sense if you see what some of the actions can be. So your strength plus your agility plus your courage is your stamina. So that would give the average Tuatha a stamina budget of 6. And then you can do all of your actions. Now you can only measure Measurements are in inches, measured from the closest edge of a model's base, and can only be made once an action's been declared. So if you're going to strike somebody or shoot somebody, you can't pre-measure. And so you only get to do the measurement when something's actually declared. So that's why when we come to range combat later on, you have to do all the actions in an action string before you actually shoot. And once you declare the shoot action, that's when you get to measure what the range is between you and a target model. Because no dice are being rolled. So that's the randomness is your ability to guess ranges before you actually fire. For the RPG part, there's also things like speaking actions to communicate with each other, which could be important for RPG reasons. And then instinctive reactions. These are actions which a character may be forced to perform by actions of other models. So for instance, if I have an activated or if I have stamina remaining and I get shot by the enemy, I can instinctively duck. And that's gonna reduce the accuracy range of the shooting model. But if I don't have any stamina left to duck, then I can't do it. So ducking isn't something you can do preemptively, but if you save stamina at the end of an activation, you can go back and do it as a reaction instead. So saving some of your stamina off that 6-point budget could be, if an opponent has slings or bows or something, can be really important later on. And then we have some sort of like reference here to like characters, models, game turns. What's a miniature? What's a friend or foe? How can you see each other? It's all models eye view. And then secondary stats. So perception is charisma plus wisdom. Charisma is wisdom plus perception. And certain skills will use your charisma or your accuracy. Perception plus courage is your accuracy. So that's how far you can shoot. Dexterity is your courage plus agility. Finesse is your agility plus strength. Presence is your strength plus wisdom. So leadership skills and abilities and attacks and stuff like that might use your presence. Accuracy, like firing a bow and arrow or using a sling, would use your perception, your perception and courage, and that would give you your overall stat. And then like dexterity, like if your dodge would be your courage plus agility, finesse would be your agility plus your strength. And then finally, at the end of it all, you have menace. And menace is kind of a key stat for the RPG characters and for playing the warband game because it's how scary you are. But it's always changing throughout the course of the game based upon how scary you are, how many people you're with, how many people that the people you're trying to scare have with them, and then the bonuses and penalties for different items. So for instance, your presence, so it would be your base menace, your strength and your wisdom, plus bonus from skills, traits, and items, like do you have like the terrifying ability, and then plus other enemy models that your opponent can perceive at the same time, and then minus other friendly models perceived. And remember, perceived is inside your perception range, so that's just gonna be like a 2-inch range. So it's when big groups of models get together, that's the kind of your breaking test, especially for the mass combat game. Like if one side is overly menaced, they'll start to run away. And then we got our actions. So now you can start to see stamina costs, right? So like my Tuatha, who's got a stamina of 6, their walk costing 3 stamina means they can move up to their dexterity range. So your dexterity range would be your agility plus your courage. That's right. So for him, that would be a 4-inch move, right? Because agility is 2, courage is 2. That means a walk would be 4 inches. Creep. This model can move as a walk. If it comes into a model's perception range, it will only be perceived if it performs a non-silent action. If a model creeps across another model's field of vision with a clear line of sight, it will be perceived and counts as walking. Creeping is silent. So remember, perception range is 360, but line of sight is just the diagram. So if you want to creep, you can make a move through and that person can't see you or react until you actually fight. So you can sneak up behind people and then attack them and they can't react because they haven't perceived you. Sprinting is at least 6, but it's, you need to have at least 6 stamina to do multiple walk options. But sprinting has extra benefits, like if you're being targeted by ranged attacks, it reduces the accuracy of the thing shooting you. Jumping would cost 3. Going, a certain range, climbing, and then barging past allows you to push people during a move action. Different rules for like obstacles, enforced falling, relational actions. These could be RPG things like whispering, talking, and shouting. And then like the distance for those things. So if you need to get information across to somewhere, that'll actually give you like how far you can do so. Ordering people. An order can be added to a speaking action or an action for +1 stamina. Any one friendly model that can hear can immediately refresh and activate. This counts as a new activation. The model which performed the order activation may resume its activation when the order model is completed. So only certain models can do orders, like with the leader ability, they can issue orders, but that allows them for the cost, like the stamina cost +1 of whatever they're doing. So if you are in whisper range, it would cost you 2 stamina to issue an order. If you're in shouting range, it would cost you 4 stamina to issue an order. But it means you can have guys go multiple times. And I actually really like that order ability because it means that even in the game on the ground, whispering, talking, and shouting all have different like abilities. And you have like a command range around you that's rationalized. So when I said this game is very dense, there's a lot that you need to be able to know and do and keep track of, like for your leader to be able to like have the impact he has in the game. A lot of more like sort of simple, flat miniature games that don't have the ability to either scale down to an RPG or scale up to a mass combat game wouldn't take into account like how loud are you talking. And whispering also means that you can do things like issue an order because it's silent without triggering someone's response. So you could have somebody run up beside you, walk up behind them, whisper to them, and then have them charge somebody silently, like in the back, or creep up and stab somebody in the back, getting them to double activate, which is just a neat thing for this game. And yeah, I like that. Lifting costs 2 stamina. Now, if you have to lift an object that's heavier than your strength, you can do multiple lifts to add your strength over and over again to eventually lift it up. And it's a neat sort of like building mechanic where weaker models can pick up stronger things or do stronger things like break down doors. Dropping doesn't cost you anything. Interacting for the scenario could do things. Evaluate allows you to change on the spot and turn around. It's also silent. Go on the alert. House models to better react to what's happening around it. The model may perform no other actions after declaring it's on alert. Place an alert token next to it. It's Overwatch. The next time it perceives a change, it must refresh and activate. This is a new activation and begins at the end of the activation that caused it. After refreshing, the model's stamina is reduced by 2 for every alert token next to it. If the model ends an activation with any action other than go on alert, remove all alert tokens from it. A model in the alert is forced to perform an instinctive reaction. It may choose to go back on alert instead of an action from the instinctive reaction table, provides enough stamina to do so. And going alert is silent. Basically, it allows you to like be a sentry. And the go on alert action I really like in a game design point of view, because it means that like if you out activate your opponent, you can use the alert to save activations as opposed to your opponent burning out your activations and then just being able to do whatever they want at the end of the turn. Ride if you're mounted. And then the various states of like perceiving change, concentrating to do things, and then cooperating. If you want multiple people to do the same action, they can get bonuses. Maximum values. Because of the way the game works, it's possible to interact with very unrealistic feats, even by folkloric standards. For example, a model with an agility of 1 but a courage of 4 will be able to walk 5 inches and sprint 10 or more. Even if they're incredibly brave, that wouldn't make up for their lack of agility. For this instance, we cap the effectiveness of some actions based on their most important stats. So for a model, they can't move further than 4 times their agility per activation. The model above would not be able to go further than 4 inches irrespective of their courage, but would be able to do this with a single walk action. Their bravery reduces the stamina use. So like if really low stats, basically, it means you can't dump stat in this game. And whatever your like maximums are, usually 4 times the lowest stat in the thing. And again, a really clever piece of game design, because a lot of characters in RPGs and people who've played RPG video games especially will create a dump stat. They don't need it. Sometimes they will in this game though, because all of the combined stats are used, especially for the tabletop stuff. And capping maximums with the dump stat means that you can't have people break the game by owning up their stat lines. That's a reference not all of you will get, but most of you will. All right, so here's an interesting one. So this is a great example of how this game doesn't use dice. So shooting actions, which remember are going to be your, I believe your accuracy was it was your agility plus your courage, I think. The condition is any number of shooting actions can be performed against a single target the shooting model can perceive. So you have to be able to perceive them. Subsequent targets may then have shooting bonus actions equal to them. But these count as a separate block of actions, any bonus accumulated or lost. So your accuracy is the range at which you're going to hit something. So it would be 4 inches, like I said earlier, for that same Tuatha who's adding their courage and their agility. Now, if you were to have a ranged weapon that requires loading, you would start off by spending stamina to do that. I could aim, that adds 2 inches to my accuracy. So then I would go from 2 to 4. Then I could go, if I didn't move, there's other bonuses, the accuracy range calculator. So if I didn't move this activation, I now go to 5 for an extra inch. But if I sprinted, back down to 3. Every aim action before shooting, because you can do multiples, adds 2 inches. If the opponent has something else, like they've sprinted, for instance, that would be -2, but then +2 if they didn't move at all. So overall, let's say I have 6 stamina. I'm going to aim. I didn't move for +1. I'm going to aim twice. Now I'm at +5. My opponent didn't move yet. I'm at +7. And my base stat is going to be 4. That means I automatically hit something within 11 inches of me, but I have to know that guy's within 11 inches. So if as soon as I go and measure the range, if he was 13 inches away, I miss. And I got to start the process all over again. But that means that basically the process starts over, and any of my aims I did this activation before, if I had more stamina left, would be lost, and you go to start aiming again. So again, diceless system, and the reason you can't pre-measure until you declare your action of shoot is because you don't know how far away that guy is. Also, my accuracy, remember, is capped, and I believe it's 3 times my perception, or 6 times my perception. So if I had an accuracy of 2, or perception of 2, then that would be 12 inches maximum range for me to shoot at anyway. And it's just really neat. Again, no dice. It's the guessing part. The random part is your ability to kind of gauge distance in the battlefield. And again, this is not a hardcore, strategy game. It's a cooperative kind of RPG warband game. So I think that's just a clever mechanic. And I really haven't seen a diceless system like this before. All right. And then we have grappling actions. If a model is not already grappling, you can initiate a grapple by just walking into combat with somebody or sprinting or creeping. This is normal movement and subject to the same conditions, maximum movement and stamina. So this is your melee combat. All melee is considered grappling. Grappling is unarmed, but then you can add weapons to it to make grapples more dangerous. If the model initiated the grapple, begins its initiate move from a position that can be perceived by the target, and the target's not currently engaged in a grapple, then the target model gets to use the following grapple reactions. So they can run away, they can flee, they can dodge. After the initiating model is moved, the target may be moved 90 degrees around the attacker's base. And they can stand, the model faces its attacker head on. And that costs nothing. So those are your 3 reactions you can do if you have the stamina remaining. Now measure the distance between the initiating model and its target. If the movement action is sufficient to get into base contact or within weapons reach of the opponent, and the 2 models are now engaged in the grapple. So some weapons have longer ranges to fight with. And remember, you're doing all of the reactions before the opponent moves, which I think is really interesting. If the target model made a dodge, it's now moved around the attacker's base, remaining at the same distance. The attacking model initiated the creep. The target is at a severe disadvantage. Leave the model in a position where they can connect. The attacker's line of engagement should be on the target's base, but the target may not have line of engagement touching the attackers. If any other instance turns the model so that one line of engagement lines up with the initiating fighters, a model that is engaged in a grapple but has not yet activated this game turn becomes caught up in the fight and skips its normal refresh and activation. A model which is grappled during a game turn but has still become disengaged due to defeating the opponent or falling prone may still refresh and activate as normal. So if you start engaged, you're done, but if you aren't engaged anymore, you can still refresh and activate. Maximum values. Nimble but weak. A model's grapple score can exceed 5 times its strength, irrespective of its agility and any bonuses from conditions, skills, and items. Its weakness means it's easily overcome by stronger opponents. And that's our grapple result calculator. So to see who wins a grapple each round, they take their finesse. So again, finesse, I believe, was strength plus agility. And apply the following modifiers. So remaining stamina. If the model initiating the grapple with a creep, their opponent can't add their stamina because they didn't know they were there. Plus stamina used in the initiating the move if the grapple was initiated this round and the target was not able to react. So that person, let's say I'd crept in and I had used 3 stamina to do that, and then I wanted to make a strike, I would just add my 2, whatever the strike cost is, the attack cost is, and then, so I think it was 2 for a strike. 2 for a strike if I make the strike action. And then you calculate the difference. So -3 if widespread. If a model is widespread, doesn't have a line of engagement. -1 per off-balance condition on the model. And then plus or minus any bonus penalties from items, traits, or skills. Models which grapple must use all the remaining stamina in the grapple and are therefore exhausted and to be transferred. So you don't get to activate again. This makes models that are already grappling vulnerable to subsequent attacks. So let's say I went in, I crept in behind somebody. They don't get their stamina at all. I would get to use my stamina of, I think it'd be 3 left after the creep. And then we'd see the difference. So I'd have 0 stamina to my 3. I get a strike. The winning model inflicts 2 damage or the impact value of the weapon used on its opponent. So 2 damage unarmed. If I was using an axe, for instance, I might have an impact of 4. I would do 4 endurance damage to that guy, minus any armor reductions or anything like that. You could floor them. You could also double strike them. So the greater the difference in staminas, the more damage you're basically going to do to somebody. And then continuing grapples. If their models engage at the start of a new game turn, then these grapples are resolved before any other models are activated. So all melee happens first. The player with the turn counter decides in which order grapples should be resolved. Grappling models refresh and have the following options. Models with the highest decisiveness declare their actions first, and the player with the turn counter breaks off any ties. So you can break off if you want and move away, and that would basically end your turn, but then you get to activate after. So you can move twice your dexterity range away from the attacking model. And then you're facing. You can change facing to move around in like your line of engagement. And then you can keep grappling. You spend 0, and you just keep on fighting if you want to. And so you can see the lines of engagement are based on your facing. You have to be in front 180 to be engaged. And then complicated grapples. Basically, it's, having multiple combats, shooting into combat, prone, stuff like that. We get Fate Weaver actions. It's all of our magical stuff. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but obviously there's a ton of magical stuff that you can do. And then instinctive reactions. I talked about a little bit of these earlier with the duck one. If you haven't activated yet or you have stamina left, if an instinctive reaction is called for and the character is exhausted, their only option is to fall prone. So if you have no stamina left. Performing an instinctive reaction does not count as activate and the model does not refresh. So you would just start with less stamina if you were to duck, for instance, but you could create a -2 accuracy to the person shooting you, which could just cause it to miss. Evaluate's a cool reaction because it lets you turn around if someone's sneaking up on you. And they give you some examples of a game turn. Tons of skills. Now, what's interesting is when you make a character, typically you'll have one of these to start with. When you don't, this is your how you learn skills overall. You start with one. So you could have attributes too, like giant, flying, veiled, swallow. But then when you start at the bottom here, like let's say I want to be a warrior, you then go into your next skill set as you level up and spend experience. So a warrior could then become a grappler. From a grappler, they could then learn swordcraft, and that would allow you to add bonuses. You get +2 to any test based upon if you have a skill. So I'm hitting with a sword. I don't have a sword skill. I just use my stamina. If I'm a warrior who then unlocks grappler, who then unlocks swordcraft, I could then get +2 to my totals for having swordcraft on my sword. And that would cause me to get bigger differentials basically when I'm fighting. Archery, for instance, if I wanted to be a warrior or marksman, an archer always counts as aiming at least once. The 2-inch bonus applies to their shoot actions. Shooting attacks made by them gain piercing, which allow you to get through armor. Axecraft, for instance, a model of this skill who uses an adze, axe, scarex, or snagger in a grapple may perform the following grapple action if they win a round by 4 or more. Disarm one of the opponent's weapons is broken and dropped. Brawler. So Brawler or Berserker. Berserker is Warrior, Grappler, and Melee Craft are all prerequisites. A model with this skill adds +2 to any damage inflicted in a round where it initiates a grapple with a sprint because you spear the guy like you're Goldberg. Yeah, it's Goldberg. It's a Goldberg reference. Eagle Eyes. Here's a good one. Prerequisites, Ranger or Sage in Wilder lore. A character with Eagle Eyes can target actions at models and objects in their peripherals. So that's where you get to use the peripheral part of the template. Edge Strike. Prerequisites, Warrior, Grappler, and Shieldcraft. A model with the skill using a shield and a grapple can use it to perform a strike action with an impact of 3. A model suffering damage from an Edge Strike gains the off-balance condition, so you can shield bash people. So you can see that like the skill trees are interesting because they allow you to have all kinds of interesting like interactions based upon what you're armed with. And then stat advances. Anytime a model could acquire a skill, it can instead acquire a stat advance. Only core stats, wisdom, perception, courage, agility, and strength can be given advance, but this will in turn affect irrelevant secondary stats. A stat costs an amount of experience equal to the current stat of the power of 3. So raising a stat of 2 to 3 costs 2 times 2 times 2, so that'd be 8. Raising a stat to 3 to 4 costs 3 times 3 times 3, so that would be 27. Raising a stat to 4, etc., etc. So because the stats are pretty high, and like there's a huge like trickle down experience to raising stats, it's commensurately more expensive based on what you kill. And then traits, like if you're blind, a model's trait has no field of vision. Fey, a model with this trait takes additional 2 damage anytime it takes hit with a bog iron weapon. And the various different factions will have different traits. And then all our items. There's a huge number of items and equipment here too. Domestic items, different weapons, and all this the different keywords that you can have for your weapons too. Like for instance, reach allows you to fight an initiative grapple at range. We have all of the different like cost for things too in rings. So like a longsword, it's a grapple weapon, has a reach of 2 inches, so you can engage at 2 inches. A heft of 4, an impact of 3, unwieldy and piercing, and it costs you 10 rings. So if you look at the stat line, so for instance, heft is... Those are the herb mixtures. Please note that some of these herbs are entirely fictional. They're like, please don't use these herbs. The keywords are... That's right, optional. Encumbrance. If you're playing the Woods as a role-player skirmish game with a few models, you might want to use encumbrance. A model is said to be encumbered if it's holding an item, which it is not using to perform the current action. So fighting or grapple with an axe while holding a flaming brand in the other hand, or picking herbs or carrying a bow. Or both hands with items with a heft value greater than 0. Models which are encumbered must pay an extra 1 stamina to perform actions and suffer -2 to their grapple score. There are 3 types of container items: belt, straps, and packs. A belt can hold 2 items, up to heft 3 each. A strap may be attached to a single item, and a pack can hold any number of items with a heft of 1 or less. So because you started with a belt for all of your characters, right, that heft will become important. You're probably not going to use heft in the warband skirmish or the mass combat version. And then the armor stats, which are probably important to talk about, because we're talking about weapon items. So absorb, for instance, for your armor stats. When a model takes damage, an amount equal to the absorb value of the armor is deducted. So for example, a model with a padded jerkin absorb 2 is hit by an axe, impact 4. They'd sustain 1 damage. So 3 minus 2 equals 1. Actually, that math doesn't make any sense. Impact 4 would then be 2 damage. That math is wrong. Only the highest absorb value is used for a character that's wearing multiple pieces of armor. A character with padded jerkin and scale mail has an absorb of 2 from the jerkin, not absorb 3, the 2 of them added together. And then a braid, a model wearing armor may choose to take damage on its abrade value instead of losing endurance. Deduct any absorb value as normal and then reduce the armor's abrade value by the remaining damage. Any leftover damage is applied to the model's endurance. A model must take all damage inflicted by a single source on either its armor or its endurance. However, if damage is being dealt by 2 sources, damage from one may be taken to the armor and the other to the model's endurance. If a piece of armor has an abrade value and it goes to 0, the armor is destroyed and lost. So basically there's like disposable armor and armor that stays. So like scale mail, for instance, is absorb 1, abrade 3, and you can choose just to, so you can reduce the damage, or you can just soak damage into the abrade and have it go away. Ring mail is abrade 4, sandal armor is abrade 6, a helm is abrade 2, right? So things can basically be like destroyed. Armor which does not have an abrade value can't be destroyed. So like padded jerkins and leather jackets never get destroyed. And even if the abrade value goes to 0 on scale mail, you could also just choose to do the absorb 1 instead. And then goblin armor. Goblin armor is made by kobolds, who are excellent craftsmen who have sided with the goblin war effort in order to have free reign to express themselves. As a result, each piece of armor is absolutely unique. All are aesthetically exquisite, and very often they are truly effective in stopping harm from the wearer. A piece of goblin armor can only be worn by goblins. When first purchased, they gain runes, using the nearest 3 stones to generate 3 qualities for the armor. So, like, basically you pull 3 rune stones, or roll 3d6, and you can see that the soft lining gives it absorb 1, its expert shapes give it abrade 4, and a spectacular but impractical helm reduces perception by 1. So goblin armor is hilarious, but often incredibly effective. We get some lovely color sections here on terrain and miniatures to try and give you like a sort of green and pleasant land. Some role-playing tips on how to create difficulties for what things are. Which are like non-combat actions and stuff like that. How to get through difficulties in the tabletop. Tunnel games. So here we have field division. Moving underground. Instead of moving underground, you move a square per inch. And then like your facings and how they would work in your line of sight. Perception. And that's expanded in that expansion as well. Some rules for solo games in the RPG setting. What people are going to do, and then playing your skirmishes. So playing skirmishes, like I said earlier, you're going to have 100 rings to recruit followers. If you purchase any additional equipment for them, that comes at that same cost. You can also include a single model with the alignment of the folk types, like wood, hill, fen, mine, fair, from the warband. So like the Tuatha could include like only Tuatha models, but a bunch of the Fae had the access to things like the Spriggans could take. I think it was or the goblins could take the kobolds, the Spriggans could take the green man, right? Like you have these sort of like these like larger sort of like, you know, almost like monster characters that would then join you. And then Seelie and Unseelie courts. Instead of picking from one of your warband types, you could create a Seelie or Unseelie court, and that just means any creature of Seelie alignment or Unseelie alignment. You form your companies. These are basically the ability to group like 2 to 3 models together to form like a multi-stat unit. And then you get like your objectives for the game. So these are usually how you earn XP. Also, like revenge. Choose one character belonging to another player who has wronged your band in some way. You must cause significant harm to them. If you manage to inflict damage on them and make them fall prone, you get 5 XP. You manage to reduce them to 0, you get 15 XP. You might be trying to steal things, observe people, escape from someone, rescue, and everybody's going to have a different objective. Board sizes. You want to be at least a 3-foot board, it says. 3 to 4 players work better on a larger board. And then places of power. Dot amongst the world realms are places of power. Some are natural rifts in the fabric of reality. If you wish, you can have a single place of power as a terrain feature on the board. A place of power will have an aura that emanates 8 inches around it. A fate weaver with this area can add to their stamina for the purpose of fate weaving. The amount that they add is equal to 8 minus the distance from the place of power in inches. So the closer you are, the more stamina you gain for free spell castings. It's like a ley line, and you get to absorb power from it. You can also roll or draw runes for different weather effects, like mist and wind. It can be dark outside, and then you get some campaign rules. It's really concise, but there's a lot in here. Like, how do you do the campaign? Like through like different like time sequences. Like, is it summer? Is it spring? Is it light? Is it dark? Some injury stuff, and injuries are not a dice roll. Again, no dice in this game. It's what was your endurance level when you went down, and what was the condition when you it was like over. So if you had 3 or more endurance left at the end of the game, and you weren't prone, you didn't get an injury. If you were prone, you could be injured. If you had 1 or 2 left, you might have had a concussion, even though you didn't go unconscious. If a character received 4 more damage from one action, and you went to 0, trauma permanently reduced your endurance by 1. Severe trauma permanently reduced your endurance by 2. Dread, courage can go down. Broken arm, lose strength. If the character receives 6 or more damage from one action, you could be everything from like dead to perceived trauma. And like eye injuries, broken legs. And then preference. Models can only sustain injuries equal to the number of body parts they have. In most cases, this will be 2 broken arms, 2 broken legs, but due to a weird array of creatures in the woods, it could vary. A Mairi, for instance, can only sustain 1 eye injury. If a model is sustained more, then it can't take that injury. A model which can't take any more injuries is dead. A model which sustains an injury may not perform any activities until its next game. And then bitter experience. Being injured is a good way to learn. For each model which sustains an injury, you can add 5 XP to your warband development pool. You don't add this XP to the warband score. So it wasn't stuff that you had to earn, so it's just free XP that you can spend. But yeah, multiple injuries, they then lead to that person being dead. You can then go and recruit people. You got to feed everybody. After each game, the warband must consume provisions or they'll suffer malnourishment. Using and learning skills in between games, buying more equipment. So it'll say what you can buy and from where. So like Spriggans can buy common and rare items. Tuatha can just buy common items. Nolix can buy Nolix and common items. And then fighting in a Werid. Your warband can be used as independent characters in a battle game or can form a unit called a Werid. You may replace one unit in your army list with a Werid. A Werid has the following profile based on its wisdom. Its members as follows. So like you get the highest and lowest values in the unit for when you have those multiple models. For example, a Werid containing 3 Huldra, 1 Gnome, and 1 Nollik has a discipline of 3 and endurance of 5. You can make a base for your unit and put them together if you want to multi-base them, and then you just treat them as a model in the game. Then we get our mass battle games. Basically, it's for ranking people up and then doing things in groups, doing like group grapples and stuff like that. But the most important thing is going to be menace, because that's how people run away. And the actions and reactions that make more sense to using big combats and lots of models. Great miniatures and art, I think, in this too. And then casting runes. This is one of the other only RNG things here. To make it easier to track the various conditions of the game, use runes. You can make these in chits or use actual rune stones in the table. And it's just fun game aid to have in a game where there's no dice, but you're doing this like themed Fey thing. And you can cast runes, an interesting way to make some random decisions in your games. Also, it's not a real one. You can also solve disputes with the runes. And we get a quick reference of all the common actions, a character sheet for the RPG, a warband sheet, GM reference for the RPG, a warband roster for the warband skirmish game, and then an army list for playing army list games. And then some other stuff from Oakbound, like Factious Waste, which is the Necromunda analog. And great credits for all the art and design and stuff too. And we're done. And that's it, baby. The Woods. Man, oh man. What a game. This was a big one. Like, there's a lot to this game. And for indie games, especially for indie games from, 5 or 10 years ago, this is a really ambitious piece of design, especially considering it doesn't use dice. Not having any kind of dice RNG is a really interesting choice. But in this like small skirmish or RPG setting, I think it works fine. The RPG setting is, I think, there's a little more of a barter to the stat system, because when you have a GM and they say, okay, I'm going to determine the difficulty of doing this, they don't tell you how hard it is. They just say it looks X or Y kind of difficulty. And then you have to pick 2 stats to combine plus any relevant skills to try and tackle the obstacle. That more like blind bluffing game of, is the stats you picked appropriate to the thing, like according to the GM, and then how's their difficulty gone? That's, I think, the purest form of this kind of a diceless mechanic. It's a lot more just opposed stacking and maneuvering in the tabletop skirmish version. But I think it still works there. And the mass combat system, I think, works fine too. But the thing that I think is the coolest about this game is just the setting itself and the amount of work that's been done to kind of make like a post-apocalyptic phase setting. So you could reskin this for lots of things if you wanted to. You could do a horror version of this game, obviously doing like a folk horror thing. You could very easily reskin this to even like a space setting. There's not a lot of range combat in it, but the way that range combat works, like you just something that needs reloading, like you could use black powder stuff and just add the noisy rule to it. Like, this is a very flexible army list as far as making characters, finding some kind of analog for whatever the miniatures you want to use is, and then throwing them on the table and playing a game. And it's not prescriptive. It's very much a menu of items that you pick from to try and create the best possible experience for you and your opponent. So I would hearken this more to like a Rogue Trader or Inquisitor and like the philosophy of how it's designed, with the very unique addition of the fact that they've gone diceless and they've built this sort of like stat opposed barter system to try and do all your resolution. The maneuvering line of sight I think is really creative. And overall, if you're looking for something really different with a lot of crunch, I think The Woods has got legs. And obviously Factious Waste being a sci-fi version of this, and it's already on the list for patron picks, we'll probably check out at some point too. Very, very different, and I think it's a good, an amuse-bouche, if you will, a break from like the traditional games we've kind of been looking at in the past, that they feel more like modern game design. This is a very old school game design game, and I think it's fun to break it up and introduce people to that kind of stuff every now and again. So, like I said, if you want to go vote on what the next game that we pick is, you can jump on the GMG Patreon, and of course that would also give you access to the before and after sort of like Q&As and hangouts that we do. Just give it another 30 to 40 minutes of content, which is going to be always just for the GMG patrons. So if you are one, you can jump in and check that out. You can also check it out, like it'll be up there. So if you didn't get to participate yourself, you can jump and watch it anytime. And if you're watching this live on YouTube, thanks for checking another great indie game. And for Jeff and Christopher for writing a real interesting banger with such an interesting and unique theme. So thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next week for more Indie Hour. Ton of mash.